Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thanks for coming to my channel. I appreciate you visiting. Before you leave today, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that helps me out a lot. Um, I have a lot of content here. I've been working on it for over a year now, and I'm up to close to 130 videos. So, if you're a beginner, or even if you're not a beginner, there's a lot of good ideas here you could borrow from. So, you should consider subscribing. Uh, Before we get started, I wanted to give a special shout out to my newest patron over at Patreon, Bonnie B. Thank you for joining up. I really appreciate your support. Um, if you're interested in becoming one of my patrons over there and seeing some of the cool content I have there, uh, check out some of these things that I have going on over there. Um, if you want to support me in another way but don't want to sign up for Patreon, you can always buy me a coffee. And there's links to both of those things in the video description down below. Not necessary, but appreciated. One last thing, I have a website, and if you're interested in buying some pretty things that are handmade, you should check out the link up above for my website. I'll put a link right up there for you. All right, enough shameless self-promotion. Let's talk about today's project. Not sure what we're going to call this. We're thinking maybe something having to do with a pedestal. Because the setting that we're going to do today is a faceted stone setting, and it sits up high on a ring, and it's different than the kind that I've shown before. So I think it'll be an interesting addition to your and my repertoire as far as different kinds of prong settings to do. So with that being said, let's get started. So I think this should be a fun one. I've never made one quite like this, so it'll be a new one to me as well. But first off, I'll show you the stone I picked. This is I didn't even think I had any of these left. I got these years ago, and they're blue synthetic quartz. If I remember, they were manufactured in Russia or something like that. But I always thought they had a really pretty color for a synthetic quartz. Almost a London blue topaz, or maybe even in the right light, it looks like one of those Yogo sapphires. So uh, I'm not huge on synthetic stuff, but I do like this one. So. Um, it's about a 7 millimeter too. I measured it a little bit ago. The materials we'll need for this project are 16 gauge round and 22 gauge sheet, which I have right here. So these two things. I think, I may have to adapt that since I've never made one of these as we go. So it'll be kind of a learning experience for me as well. Let's see. As always, I'm using hard silver solder, and I use sheet solder. Looks like this. And My-T-Flux, which I get from Rio Grande. And that's about it. So I kind of sketched out the basic idea here. And make sure you can see this here. So we're going to have just kind of a basic band. I may flatten this out up here so it gets wider as we go. But I'm going to make a round tube out of 22 gauge wire here. And then I think I'm going to use 16 gauge round to make these prongs that stick up like this. And then there's going to be another wire that goes around as a little ring inside of there for the stone to sit on top of. Now the one I drew here, it's sitting up a little higher than I want it to, so it's probably going to be a little shorter. And while I was thinking about this, I think I might cut some notches in the side of the tube here so that this can sit down just a little bit more, and we'll see how that goes. I got a new saw, so I'm kind of excited to try it out. I've been using an old saw that I didn't like very much for a long time. So, all right, so let's get started. Let's start with the tube, okay, and we'll go from there. So I think we need to cut a strip, but we need to figure out how long of a strip to make a tube about that size. I wanted the stone to stick out just a little bit beyond the tube so that it was slightly bigger than that. And I drew a little circle here that's a little bit smaller than the stone. And so if we measure this distance, the diameter of it, and then multiply it times pi, that'll give us a pretty close length for how to get that size of a tube. So this isn't going to be super precise, but it'll get us pretty close. So we got like 7, call it, let's see, Well, this is about a 7mm stone, so I'm thinking if we go like 6 will be good. Let's do 6 times pi. So pi is 3.14. 6. You get your math lesson today. 6 times 4 is 24. 1 times 6 is 8. 3 times 6 is 18. 2. So 18, almost 19 millimeters. So keep that in mind. We got a nice straight spot right here, so I think we can do it there. Flatten that out a little bit better. 18.84, so almost 19, so about right there. I'm going to make it a little deeper than it needs to be, because we can then file it down or cut it down if we need to. That's about ½ centimeter or 5 millimeters. Alright, that should get us pretty close. Theoretically, if my high school math skills have survived all these years. I'm going to do a little cleanup filing here. You could just use your regular round nose pliers, but these bail making pliers are super handy for stuff like this, to get it, you know, shaped partially in the shape you need it to be. So I'm just going to grab it near the end here. This may have come out a little smaller than I expected, but we'll see. So when I solder something like this together, I usually try and get the two ends straight onto each other if I can. Like that. So we can push them past each other a little bit so they're springing together. Push it past like that. I might need to use a second pair of pliers here. Pull them back out because my fingers are too big, but pull it back out until they kind of pop together. And then we can just kind of like squish them down like that, and we'll have a nice tight seam there that I can solder pretty easily. Now I'm definitely going to have to use the round nose pliers to try to pinch out some of these sharper corners. Looks pretty good. Okay, so I think next I'm going to try and figure out where to. I'm going to cut cross notches that should go straight through the center and leave a notch 180 degrees from each other, and then 90 degrees from those first ones this way, so that there's like a cross cut out of it. So I need to figure out, and I can use a square here to kind of mark it probably. Graph paper is surprisingly useful sometimes. I'll use my new jeweler's saw to cut those out over on the bench pin. I don't need very thick of slots, since 16 gauge wire is cutting pieces way longer than I'm going to need probably. Although I have a little reason for cutting them long, and I'll show you in a minute there, but each of these should be riding on the inside, one of those right there, and then bending up through the notch that I create. So let's make those notches next. So here's my new saw. I'm kind of excited to try it. It's definitely got a nice tight blade on it. Let's see how quickly I can break the blade, sawing not being my forte. I'm going to get it started so that I can set it down and do it then. Now what I think I'll do, I got those marks sort of delineated. I'm going to use an abrasive white wheel to just kind of carve out the little spot there. Guess we'll find out how straight I got those. I'm gonna file one end of these, all of them, just so I get a starting point for length. I curve them around this. Do I want more of a curvy shape, or do I want more of a... The top may be a little curvy, so do it like that, kind of. I'm just comparing my bends to see how close I am to them. Try to make them relatively similar. So I'm bending it back the other way, like that, because I want this to sit in there nicely, so I can solder them in. See my precision measuring. A little longer, but that doesn't matter too much. Okay, now because of the curve on the inside here, I think I want this to slope downwards on the inside of that little slots that I made there. So I'm going to see if I can't get a little bit of a slope going inwards there. So it'd be nice if I could still see anything. Mid-40s, all of a sudden I started needing readers to read and stuff like that. So I've gone downhill ever since. So here's my thought. The thought is we find a nice spot on here. It's sort of flattish. Push it in there a little bit. I think I'm going to cut these down quite a bit, so I don't have to push them quite as far into the pad. This is called a magnesia block. You've never seen one before. It's just kind of a softer surface that you can push things into. The flux eats them up pretty fast, but sometimes it's invaluable to have some way to secure something in place. Everybody always uses this stuff called binding wire, which I have never ever used in my life. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I just have not found an instance where I couldn't figure out a way to do it without it. That's not to say that couldn't happen. Okay, quick Chad, solder it before it moves or something. Well, it looked like we were successful. I guess we'll find out for sure momentarily. So I didn't anticipate this. They didn't solder nicely to the sides down here, so I should have probably thought that that might happen, but I may be able to salvage this. I can cut that off, and I can run a drill right down through the center of it, I think, and we'll be able to clean it up, and then just cut it off nice, because the band is going to go through that anyway, so I think it'll be alright. Okay, so I'm going to do that off camera probably. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when I cut off some of this tube that they're actually relatively symmetrical in there, so that'll solve the problem. I didn't have to drill it or anything like that, so I just cut it off. I probably need to straighten it out with the file a little bit. The thing we need to do next is I want to make a ring that's just about almost exactly the size of this stone, and so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this 16 gauge, or maybe this 14 gauge. Let's do the 14 gauge I have sitting here. I'm going to straighten some of this out and just hammer a little bit flat. I want something a little more flattish for the stone to sit on. It's probably long enough. It's not that big of a stone. So I think it'll just give it a little more structural integrity if we have something that's thinner and taller as the ring that the stone sits on. I don't know, I'm just kind of winging this as I go. When you pound on something, it makes it much harder. It's work hardening. if you're new to this. Alright, and if the way to get rid of that work hardening is to anneal it, which is to heat it up to almost red hot, kind of just where it starts turning a little reddish, and then letting it cool off, and that softens it back up again. Let that cool for a second. After it's cooled for a while, you can usually just dunk it in the water to cool it the rest of the way. That's looking pretty good. If you do it like that, you can kind of set it over the stone and keep making it smaller until it's just about the size you want it to be. I find that to be an effective way of getting a ring that's about the right size. I need to file this end that I just cut flat. I do not have a surgeon's fingers. Good thing I didn't pursue that as a career. So far things are working out pretty good. That doesn't mean I don't have time left to screw things up. Honestly, most of these video ones that I've done, I haven't had too many things go terribly wrong. Well, back I had a stone break while I was doing a video. A couple of things I had to rethink midway through how I was going to go about doing them, because it became apparent partway through the video when I was making it that something I was doing wasn't going to work. So I had to change plans. If you have a jump ring mandrel, this would be a good time to use that, maybe. For years I never had any of these. Just kind of one of those tools that be sort of nice to have, but I didn't have one. And then over the years, a couple of people have given me some, just because they had an extra one or something. So I'm going to file this down a little bit. See how we did on size. I think that's not bad for size. See how much girdle will stick up above that. That's actually about what I'd like. So I think that's good. I may file this a little bit thinner. It's still kind of thick, so I may go around it a couple of times with my bastard file. I think I'm going to file it into kind of a taper. Tapers downwards a little bit on one side. What's the worst thing that could happen? Okay, now to figure out how we're going to shape these. I think because of the size of the stone, they're going to have to go up more like this. You have to kind of figure out how it's going to fit in here. So, we have to do a little playing with it. Okay, so I'm doing is figured out about how far I wanted that ring to sit in here, and now I'm making a sharp bend up there, making the top prong go a little bit more vertical so it'll match the side, and hopefully if I get these all about the same level, the ring will sit in there straight. It's starting to look like it's in the right sort of position. If I can get it to stay there. It'd be nice if I could get it in there snugly, so it had less chance of moving around. I have to do this a little bit. My fingers are too clumsy. Let's see if we can get it to sit like that. It'll be great. So I think I may bend these inwards just a skosh at the top here. See if we can get it to stay in place there. I'm trying to escape before I can get you secured. Okay, so you can see I kind of got it snug up against the little ring there, and then I bent them inwards just enough to where it's less likely to tip upwards in any direction. So you want to try and get it as straight as you can. Once it's in there, you're probably not going to be able to move it too easily. I'm going to push it down in here. Less likely to have any weirdness happen. I think that one got it. Everybody connected now? Okay. That'll be pretty, I think. Now we need to start thinking about a band, and I was thinking 12 gauge maybe. And I wanted to make it around a size 7, 7.5, somewhere in there. My wife said she might have dibs on this. She likes it. I'm going to round this out. Spend a little time getting it all in the same kind of plane or pretty close to it before I do much else. Do a little smoothing out filing here. All right. Now, I think I'll try and flatten one end of this so it flares out a little bit. I'm going to figure out where the solder joint is. Well, there is a trick for that. Here, you're interested. Look just a little bit. Solder joint generally oxidizes a different color than the rest of it slightly. I don't know if you can see it here, but the solder right there, so that's where my solder joint is. If you filed away all the excess and you can't tell anymore, that's just a little trick because it oxidizes differently slightly than the rest of the silver, and so I can find it more easily. So for this ring, I think I'm going to put that solder joint right underneath where the setting goes, the top of the ring. But to do that, I'm going to pound this flat here so that it has kind of a layer there. So I can do this without hitting my finger like I did the other day. So basically, I just want it to get a little wider up there. It doesn't have to be huge. So to me, the part that I flattened here, I think that right there, where I want to mount that setting. Okay, so I smoothed it out with a Dremel a little bit. And I marked on either side, say I centered it between the prongs here, kind of the center point for here. Same way over there. I hope I got it relatively centered anyway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a notch with the saw right there, and we'll slide that right on there, and then we should be able to solder it pretty easily with a little luck. So I'm going to do that next. After a little bit deeper sawing and a little bit of playing with the file, I got this to where it slides in there pretty good. And it looks pretty clean on there. Here we go. Decent sized piece of solder here. Mostly I'll be heating the bottom and then pushing the heat upwards so I don't have anything come apart on me or shift on me. A lot of the mass is in the band down there. So. Oops. I lost my ball. Back here, solder ball. So I stuck that in there way too soon. Not on my game, apparently. Ideally, you don't want to stick your pick in there with your solder on it until the metal has reached that flow temperature, so you don't have to hang out there for too long. Okay, I don't think anything moved or anything, so probably okay. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and let that soak in the pickle, and we'll come back and finish it off. I have polishing hair. Okay, so I did a lot of cleanup and a little bit of pre-polishing and then a little bit of serious polishing on the wheel over there. So it's mostly ready to go. What we're going to do is I'm going to take a look at where the girdle, when this is in here, where the girdle meets the prongs that are sticking up. Make sure it's sitting flat. I want to get kind of an idea. Where those actually meet. these, I'm going to file wherever the little pink mark is on the inside of this. I'm going to file them a little bit narrower right there. Right on the inside there. Don't get too crazy about how thin you make these. I think. Let's put him in there. I'm going to start bending that one inward a little bit. And bending that one inward a little bit. So they can't move too much sideways. I'm just going to keep pushing them in until they're laying flat on the girdle facets, which are the ones right above the girdle of the stone, which is the widest point of the stone. Being a little cautious, I don't want to put too much pressure on it because this is synthetic quartz, so it's not as hard as, say, an emerald or a ruby or a sapphire. That would be a bummer to get all this far and then break it at the end. This is the table facet up here. This is the girdle. Midpoint up the side of that is where I usually cut it. So, and I will. Okay, then spend a little time kind of rounding these off. One of the things that I do when I'm filing one of these, the tops of these prongs like this, is I use my finger or my thumb as kind of a guide so I don't accidentally hit the stone. Some stones can handle it, but generally you want to avoid that if you can. Just kind of making sure everything's laying down flat. That's basically the ring. See if you can see that there. It came out pretty good. I'll go back on the polishing wheel and I'll hit the very tops of these just real gently to get rid of any kind of scratches from the file. And then I'll take some pictures of it. So, all right. Okay, that was the high-profile pedestal ring, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave today, and I'd love to have you subscribe. As I said before, there's lots of content here, plenty to peruse and keep your mind busy. Make sure to watch some other videos. There's lots of interesting content here, and check out the links in my video description. And finally, make sure to leave comments if you have something to say, or if you're interested in this but had a question, or even suggestions for videos. I love that kind of stuff. So thanks for watching again. Happy silversmithing. Take care.